and those who are joining us live via social media platforms on BiZnomics, on Facebook and other platforms, where we are going to talk about quite an important topic this evening, the path to economic revival, whether innovations will lead the way for Sri Lanka. And to discuss about this, I've invited to join this panel three eminent personalities. Of course, they are joining us through, their expertise is quite wide-ranging, different areas, but their expertise and whatever they share today, this evening, their views and their perspectives are on the broader theme of whether Sri Lanka's path to economic revival will be led through innovations, inventions, and Sri Lanka's investment into innovations. Let me first welcome Dr. Bandula Vijay, Sri Lanka's Ambassador for Science, Technology, Innovation for Sri Lanka. Good evening to you and welcome. It is quite early there in the United States. Thank you. We're very happy that you're able to join us.
Thank you for having me.
And also Mr. Deepal Suryarachi, Management Consultant and former Commissioner for Sri Lanka Inventors Commission. There is a wide range of areas that I would like to highlight that you have been involved in. But first, before I talk more on your expertise, a warm welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you. And Mr. Arjuna Somaratna, who is also a management consultant and a technical committee member for the Sri Lanka Standards 1672 of 2020 for COVID-19 safety management. And I think you'll bring a different perspective to this discussion. So thank you, Arjuna, for joining us.
Absolutely a pleasure, Indiveri. Absolutely a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think on this topic, as we begin talking about it, I would first like to start off with an opening statement for all three panelists. As we talk about this, I'd like to start off with Dr. Bandula Vijay here. Your opening statement here on the broader theme of the path to economic revival and whether innovations will lead to Sri Lanka's economic growth and revival, and for us to resurrect this economy from this time of uncertainty. You have patents for various innovations. Your expertise ranges not only in Sri Lanka, but you have made a massive impact there in the United States. So what have you got to say when we start off today on this theme?
Thank you, Indiveri. We are at a critical juncture in the history of Sri Lanka going forward. I think sometimes the pandemic just kicked us in the butt to get started. And as you might remember in the last 4 or 5 speeches I have given in Sri Lanka, I talk about the need for innovation to make Sri Lanka a globally competitive country with respect to technology. We have to make an effort to bring Sri Lanka to a global standing in a few selected areas. Now, if you, those of us who are developing various technologies here, when we think, oh, we need to get something done, we always think about China or India. If it is IT or pharmaceuticals, then immediately what comes to our mind is either China or India. Mm-hmm. Or if it is manufacturing or technology, automation, artificial intelligence, we think of China. But it's not that we cannot achieve such goals. We can. And in certain areas, we have proved that we are equal or sometimes even better than some of the other countries in Asia. For example, I mean, I have followed this project on the electric car Vega, and I have seen them, they went to, I believe they went to Geneva, and anyone who went to that exhibition would look at that car and said, wow, this is made in Sri Lanka. I mean, that just elevates Sri Lanka to a point where when people think of Sri Lanka, they think of, wow, this is an electric car. And so we have done enormous successful job in, for example, in nanotechnology, in graphene, for example, in these fertilizers based on nanotechnology. So there are pockets of this excellence in Sri Lanka. What we need is to select some of these key areas that we are good at, and we have to bring them into a global standing. Today, unlike 30 years, 40 years ago, it's a global economy. It doesn't matter what we do, we have to trade with other countries. So we have to work with different countries to buy certain things that we need, and then we have to export certain things that we produce. So it is important that we bring ourselves to this global standing and export highly value added, and I have to stress the word highly value added products and services to the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Vijay, for that. And I'd like to turn to Mr. Deepal Surarachi. Over 30 years of experience in sales, marketing, human resources management, advertising, in general management, and of that, 15 years in senior management. But beyond that, we're talking about you working as a management consultant, a trainer, an author, a speaker, and more importantly, you were the former commissioner for Sri Lanka Inventors Commission, which is why we're talking about this today with you. I'm sure you saw a lot of challenges that Sri Lanka faces while you were commissioner. And now as we look ahead, how do we come out of this situation? How do we come out of this this kind of uncertainty and the stance that the economy is facing now? But inventions, can inventions lead to Sri Lanka's economic revival? Your opening statement.
Yeah. First, thank you for inviting me to join with a person like Dr. Bandula Vijay. I mean, like I'm a small rat compared to him, and I haven't done anything that can even be compared with what he has done. What I would like to bring to the table this discussion is Dr. Vijay explained the innovation of things. I think for us to go to the next level, we have to not only innovate things, right? We have to innovate processes, the way we do things, because I will later discuss some of the challenges it has to go to the next level. I mean, right now there's a very dynamic professor from Moratuwa leading the Inventors Commission. I needed to forget his name, but I think it's far more greater than that. I think we need to look at resource allocation as a country where we are putting things and where we should be picking the winners. Secondly, we need to review the ecosystem in which that we operate. I think these are the things that I would like to bring out. One is opportunities to innovate processes, business models, even the government models, and a lot of things. The time has come for us to innovate, because without doing that, we will not be able to reach the kind of potential that we need to go. As Dr. Vijay said very rightly, there are pockets. I mean, like, you know, the Vegas of this world and what we do at Nanotechnology Institute. I mean, those are world class. But at the same time, we haven't got critical mass, right? And so there are three levels of innovations. One at grassroots level, then there's another level at intermediary level, and of course at the high end. Now, to get into the real economic boom, sometimes you don't need top 10 things to create things. Just to do a simple illustration, Arjuna might support me on this. Now, when this COVID came, and then when we wanted to have this foot-operated, pedal-operated taps, I think 3 months before, if this was the requirement, somebody would have looked at India or China and imported a container load of these things and provided. But today, I think there's a couple of local manufacturers who are doing and selling. So that is one example of an ecosystem supporting things that are intermediate level innovation. These are not new things. So I would like to explore more on some of those macro issues on what would support inventors to do and what are the possible opportunities in the process innovations and the business model innovations as a nation that we should look at.
Thank you for that. And I'd also like to now turn to our third panelist, Mr. Arjuna Somaratna. I think you're bringing us perspective in terms of Sri Lanka's standards. You were on the technical committee that developed Sri Lanka's standard 1672 of 2020 for COVID-19 safety management. But beyond this, as we talk about inventions, companies to small and medium scale entities, as we look at standards and innovations, how important it is that we incorporate standards and seriously look at standardization when we move ahead as a country to build confidence among our investors, whether local or foreign. Along with that question, I leave you to give us your opening statement. I think you're muted, Arjuna.
Yep.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Dr. Bandula Vijay, I'm so honored to share the panel with you. We are facing a pandemic of this nature after a long time of this magnitude. So some of the tools, some of the technologies that we may have discovered henceforth has never been applied on a situation like this. So if you look at that discussion, the management systems which started to evolve after the Second World War have never been tested, never been applied, never been utilized to such a situation. And if you look at the current context where the business leaders, entrepreneurs strive hard to open up, reach new normalcy, it's a fact that they carry a huge load of risk on their shoulders. Mm-hmm. So this risk needs to be managed. We need to avoid potential pitfalls. So that's one aspect of our effort to reach near normalcy. Second is, due to this pandemic, some of the aspects of trust that we had that helped the business community to function has been disturbed. So we need to re-establish this particular confidence. That basically will, once you re-establish it, without re-establishing on the other side, the momentum of the economy will not be that great. So I believe people need to be able to trust on each other, businesses should be able to work with each other. So this needs some form of trust, confidence building aspect. On the other hand, as a nation, when the economy takes over, the potential pitfall of a second wave is there. So when we look at all these three kinds of things, we need to ensure that a consistent application of controls right across the spectrum of industries needs to take place. So this is where our experience of management systems needs to be deployed. So I believe that's why Sri Lanka Standard got all of us involved. And I must say it's an excellent initiative. A lot of effort was put in place by Sri Lanka Standard. So it's basically, I believe, an innovative application of management system standards as well. And even within the management system standard, when you look at a management system standard, people tend to think as a heavyweight, dragging down tool. So we had to ensure that we don't go there. We have a light, appropriate measures of management systems together. So that's how we have developed it. I think we could discuss that kind of things, aspects in the next few minutes.
Certainly. You brought out the aspect of trust. I think that's something I'd like to talk to Mr. Suryarachi about. I think that's something you'd like to bring out. A lot of inventors have the question of trust. How do we move ahead? Will our inventions, innovations, can I trust these even when I reach out to an investor, even when I reach out to, these people who would like to invest and develop the agency, businesses or communities, funding agencies. But can we move ahead without improving on the trust factor?
I think that was the biggest question and the challenge most of the young inventors had when I was the commissioner. I think it is a exposure issue as well. And secondly, it is a confidence about themselves, another issue. I, of course, asked them, like, what is the guarantee that the person that you marry will be 100% faithful to you for the rest of your life? If I'm not, I will not going ahead with the proposal. It's exactly the same. Because if I am an inventor and if I do not discuss truthfully what is my project is, an investor will not want to take a risk. And I think probably Vijay will be able to illustrate a little bit in the American market, because in Sri Lanka, there isn't a ecosystem where investors are there to invest in ideas. In Sri Lanka, you don't have to take this risk of, inventors, innovations. Generally, only 10% become successful. So why should I put money into a system where there is only 10% chance of winning? If I cut a deal with somebody, I will make money. So this, as long as we have this deal economy in Sri Lanka, people will not want to take risks and invest. That's another major issue, right? So I think slowly there is this angel investors moving into Sri Lanka. It's like this. Sometimes you have an idea, and a lot of Sri Lankan inventors I have come across, they think, oh, this is the only idea. Nobody else in the world has got this idea. That kind of mindset. And secondly, whether you are cut out to be an entrepreneur, because inventing something is one skill, converting it into business is another. Just to illustrate the reality of the ground, when I was a commissioner, we took 100 inventors and gave them a workshop and asked them to assess themselves as to whether it takes what it takes to be an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Out of that 100, only 25 or so thought they meant to be a business people. And we trained them over 3 months and asked them to pitch to investors. Out of that lot, only one person could convince the investors to invest, right? That young boy got $60,000 of a small investment. Now that's the process. So when you hear of these things, you need to understand it's a large scale, right? I think we need to show a lot of these things where people come and invest and then they get benefit, because those people who invest, they are investing, that is their business. They invest in a venture. Once it creates certain value, they find exit of that. That is the business they are in. They are not interested in copying your idea and going somewhere else. Another example, a Sri Lankan boy developed a very good artificial leg. He went to Geneva for the exhibition, and then he met a person from Europe who said, give it to me for a couple of $1 million. He didn't want to do it because he felt, no, why should I give a Sri Lankan invention away? Now, had he taken that accept and given that, he would be in a bigger league of doing things. So this is where we lack exposure. Right? So I think this mistrust comes because lack of exposure. And they know that there are legal systems to protect, even a simple NDA. But I think it's an understanding of how things operate in the very, maybe Vijay can bring us some light of that, what is happening in USA.
Certainly. With that, I really like to talk to Dr. Bandula Vijay about, I have had several programs with you, Dr. Bandula Vijay, from the perspective of a science, a medical inventor in the field of science, technology, medicine. Your innovations commercialized, and you have secured several patents. But at the same time, the Sri Lanka's inability to produce and go to the world with new inventions, or whether it is, as we said, is it the issue of trust? You broke those barriers. You have found ways. What is the message you send here to local young people, whether it's startups or bigger companies that are looking at inventions and innovations as we look at revival of the economy?
Yeah, this is a very, very pertinent question for the topic that we are discussing. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to startups or innovations, building companies, bootstrapping, the one country that leads the world is the United States. And there are a lot that we can learn from the United States. So let's discuss get some simple things out of the way. That is, most of the young inventors, they always doubt the investor. That means, is he going to take my idea and run away? So there are already, ways how to minimize that. It doesn't mean you can totally 100% eliminate it, but you can minimize it. So such as NDAs and talking with the right people. Venture capitalists specifically do not sign NDAs. So you really need to learn how to present something to a venture capitalist and still get their interest going, okay? So that is not that difficult. Then along with that, the government can establish some rules and laws saying, how the validity of the NDAs are, so what do you declare, what do you tell the other party in your declaration. So they can get some sort of a legal protection in that. So this is the easy part. The part where Sri Lankans innovators are missing out, there are two areas. One is in the United States, we all often use the word bootstrap. That means you build your prototype by yourself in your garage. That includes me. So if I want to tell you about my own experience, the very first prototype I built was in my kitchen. So then I took it from my kitchen to my garage, and I built that prototype to a point that I can show it to somebody, yet whoever is looking at it doesn't understand the technology behind it, but the product itself. So Sri Lankans should learn how to say, okay, let us spend the money, borrow some money from friends and relatives and build that prototype. Once you build that prototype, we call it MVP, or minimally viable product, MV. Once you have the MVP, that convinces the investor, yeah, this guy has already built a prototype and it is working. What he needs is some funding so that he can make more prototypes or do a clinical study or a market study and so on. So it gives the investor some confidence. Without the confidence, it is very hard for an investor to invest money because he's throwing that money away. The other part of the same problem is most of the inventors in Sri Lanka, they do not like to give shares away to the investor. Mm-hmm. Usually the investor wants to get at least 50-60% of the company. And in most of the people that I have spoken to in Sri Lanka, they do not part with that. So what they do not understand is that 10% of a pie is bigger than 100% of not having a pie. So this kind of mentality, you have to develop that culture, right? So this is part of the problem. The second part of the problem is when I'm in Sri Lanka, I have conducted several, I don't call it shops, but people have come and we have gathered to discuss about innovations and inventions. Most of these ideas have been very much tweaking something. There's something available, you tweak it to a little bit better. So this is an incremental improvement. It is very difficult to get the interest of an investor for an incremental improvement. You have to be coming out with disruptive ideas. So disruptive ideas or something that is urgently needed. For example, in the last 6-8 weeks after the pandemic started, most of the universities in Sri Lanka and people outside of the universities start building ventilators and various other medically oriented equipment. Okay, So these are basically you're making something that already exists. It is not easy for you to take this idea to an investor and say, okay, I can make a ventilator, so fund me this project. That most investors will not invest on something like that. But there are certain times that is needed. For example, today in Sri Lanka, of course, you don't need it at this time. But like in the United States, we need a lot of ventilators. So if somebody is able to manufacture ventilators, now I understand General Motors and Ford and lots of other companies are manufacturing ventilators, there is a market for it. So it's a need-based market. So need-based markets are sometimes, of course there's a value for it. But where you can make the most money or the biggest bang for your buck is when you have a disruptive concept. One thing that we must understand, if you look at the 10 largest companies in the world, they are here and they are all simple ideas. They are all in the Silicon Valley. Plus they all came out from very, very simple ideas. We talk to each other on the internet, in the Facebook, on Zoom, or whether it's Uber and all these. If you forget about the situation with the pandemic, these simple ideas have built humongous companies. They are, before the issue with the stock market, they were worth close to $5 trillion, these 10 companies. Now, the old companies that manufactured automobiles and steel industry, the typical, the smokestack companies, they are in the billions, not in trillions. So one thing that inventor in Sri Lanka should understand is you have to come up with a simple idea. There's a value in simple ideas, something that can be turned into a product fairly quickly. So, and bring the interest and show the validity of this concept in the marketplace, or in the case of a medical device or a drug in the clinic, right? So you prove it, it's in the clinic, and then you take it to the investor. So these two things are the ones that I have observed are sort of like weaknesses in our approach. Mm-hmm. The other thing is education. Our education system is pretty much a content-based education, fact-based education. You teach the student certain amount of facts, and at the end of the semester, you give an exam to check it, right? So we have to somehow get away from this and move on to a problem-based education, make the students think, develop their critical thinking, and throughout the university education, throughout O-level, A-level, you have to make the student work on these projects that result in some idea, some product, which is the case here, by the way. So these are other things we can talk more, and I don't want to take more time answering your question, but these are some of the things that we need to really address.
Thank you for those insights. I think it's quite valuable, the thoughts and your observations that you've brought out during this discussion. Mr. Deepal Suryarachi, before I turn to you about a few points that Dr. Bandula Vijay made, Arjun, I would like to ask you now, as we talk about, as Dr. Bandula Vijay says, disruptive ideas, new ideas, how we look at a bigger picture in the long term, bigger than Sri Lanka. Again, we come to standards and the importance of standardization, whether it is small companies, startups, newly set up ventures. I'd like you to also speak about the COVID-19 safety management, the kind of thinking that you all put into this, and specifically in terms of businesses and companies, what you all have looked at going forward, and also addressing the question of standardization when it comes to new inventions, when you commercialize it, when it's set up as a venture, what we need to look at.
So actually, continuing on our discussion on probably on trust, which we started off with. So standards are basically devices which communicate trust. So even when we open our economy, probably let's say we want to bring in a new plane load of tourists into Sri Lanka, to convince them that we have looked into each and every aspect that would matter to them and matter to the operation is a very important thing. So having a third-party opinion based on a standard which is well thought through, the standard which is accepted by on a national level is a very important thing. So standards are must in this particular discussion of business-to-business relationships, business-to-customer relationship. Standards have come to stay. So even for COVID-19, the safety of assuring to your vendors, assuring to your customers is a very, very important and valuable tool. So actually, we are very glad that Ministry of Health and there are so many institutions which are coming up with guidelines. The guidelines are done up in very, very thorough, very nice fashion. We are very appreciative of that. Each and every business within each and very same industrial sector might have a unique context of their own. So I believe a guideline may not be able to apply straight away like that without understanding the risks that are carried by the individual entity. So individual entity needs to understand the risks within the operation and select the appropriate controls commensurate to the risk that they are facing. On the other hand, we need to have controls spanning the entire cross-section of our economy, not only a selected segment of industries. So then we need to have an open-ended scheme where business organization should look at their risk objectively and say, these are the controls that needs to go into that. They select it, and then the management commits towards it, and a third party comes and says, we are happy with your selection and we are going to certify you. And that certification, probably along with a label, I think Sri Lanka Standard Institute is going to do up a label also. So you could label your operation. So whoever comes into the operation can look at the label and feel confident. So this is the overall makeup, overall application. We could discuss in a little bit more detail into the various aspects of the standard if that is required. So that's about the COVID-19. So when it comes to entrepreneur, inventor, coming up with a new product, obviously this risk-based perception needs to be there. So I believe this is a part in our education which is missing. So from the school days itself, our kids need to be taught on how to appreciate risks, how to manage the controls accordingly, and that grounding will help them to be prepared for their own invention-related roles as well as their roles within the organization as well. Because more and more companies are looking at their organizational aspects through these glasses of risks. So if the employee understands these aspects, it's very easy for organization to manage their risks and manage their controls as well.
Mr. Surarachi, Sri Lanka's investments or funding allocations to research and development is just 0.1% of the country's GDP. Compared to regional figures, regionally it's 2.4%, but we have very little emphasis on research and development. When we talk about innovations leading Sri Lanka's economic revival, is this sufficient? You have been inspiring so many during your time, not just at the Inventors Commission, but also the Inventors Commission right now. They continue to do some amazing work, facilitating and supporting people with new ideas, as Dr. Bandula Vijay said, disruptive ideas that are brought forth, but emphasis into research and development. What is the message that we send to the government? Mr. Surarachi? I think we've lost Mr. Deepa Surarachi's connection while we try to reconnect with Mr. Surarachi. I think you're back. Did you hear my question for you?
Yes, the inadequacy of research, right? I would like to look at it from a different point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are a small economy, and the amount of money we have is very limited.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at, I think if my memory serves me correct, there are about 40 different organizations that has money to do research. Now, if you look at it from a very pure corporate kind of point of view, just imagine one shareholder, right? And he has 40 different companies doing research, but they don't know each other what they're doing. So this is what I said, there's a lot of opportunities for us to re-engineer processes if you want to really innovate. Right? Now, why should different organizations do research without knowing each other if they all belong to the same shareholder, that is the government? Just to illustrate this, many years ago, at a conference, there was a gentleman from Morato University, and he was presenting an invention where they have innovated an earth pot, which can be used like a Teflon kitchen appliance, non-stick pan. When he was presenting, there was a director from ITI. He said, Deepal, we have done exactly the same thing and we have it. Now it's almost, I don't know how many years, we still don't see it in the market. Now, I think one of the things government should do is club all these things together. You know, there's a tea research institute, rubber research institute, paddy research institute, then the fundamental research institutes, then there's ITI, then there's MRI. If you look at everywhere there are research happening, right? Just look at the administrative cost of these things. So if you remove all the administrative things like a front office, back office kind of a concept, and focus on research and create a platform where they share their projects so that they will not waste money. I think that's the way how we can do it. And secondly, policy consistency. I remember 6 years ago something, government said if a company is investing in research, they will give a 30% tax rebate on it. It means like 3 times you are getting money. Then it was taken back. So companies who started projects on that, that is why we don't get these things. Thirdly, when there are government agencies which are not performing, they should close them down. But Sri Lanka, it doesn't happen. They have so many government organizations doing the same thing, slightly differently. So then what happens is, then you say you don't have money to allocate for research. And I think those are the kind of fundamental innovations in the processes that we need to have. Like Bandula was talking about education. I think there's a fantastic opportunity for us to now, with this COVID thing, to ask, to get content. Why should a student go through the agony of going to a school and spending so many hours in a classroom, where the content can be given on electronic media, and they come to school to learn other skills, like even to fight, even to get hit, to run and play. That is what you need the group for, right? And today, we are like hide and seek. Recently at that Green University, I asked the lecturers, why are you asking the questions for which you know the answer? If you know the answer, don't waste somebody else's time. Ask a question for which you don't have answers. See whether students can find the answer. Unless we do this kind of thing, and if you see, more inventions come from small children. As they grow up, right, there are these school inventors clubs, and when it comes to the university, very little innovation. When I was talking to you, I have been on councils of 2 universities, and I'm on a council of postgraduate institute also. The lecturers say, look here, we have to deliver so much of content, right? And so then we have become downloading economy, downloading society. So there's no time to innovate. I think if you don't change some of these fundamentals. The third point is asking questions. Now, if you don't allow people to ask questions, right? Now, Bandula, completely different here, right? You can go to any university and give a lecture, no problem. I can go and lecture any university, but nobody will ask questions. Because we have a classroom of 40, then teacher cannot entertain questions, because if you have questions, how can you finish the syllabus? Priority is syllabus, right? So then you don't ask questions. When you don't ask questions, you don't innovate. I'll give a good example. While I was the commissioner, every year there was an innovation about improved rubber tapping knife. So I said, I'm outside, I don't know technology. I said, excuse me, I think you are trying to solve the wrong problem. I don't think anybody wants an improved rubber tapping knife, because nobody wants to do rubber tapping. If you have seen how difficult to do rubber tapping, I said, can you find a way that you can extract the rubber latex without having to go from tree to tree? And they didn't buy my answer, my question. But just a couple of months back, I think in China, they have invented that. You know, there's a robotic gadget which goes and does the tapping, and they have connected all the trees to a single pipeline, and the latex comes through. So if you don't learn how to ask the question, so I think research, well, we are a small economy, so we cannot have very large numbers. But I think even the allocation is, once you go to an organization, once you take all the administrative functions and the vehicles and everything, there's very little money for research. So I think immediately what government can do is take all the administrative functions and give the core money to research and make them accountable, right? Because here people do research, very fancy projects, and nobody benefits from that. You know, so we should do something and show results. I think few changes like that will happen. Otherwise, we'll be talking this only.
Dr. Bandula Vijay, I think you might have something very important to add to the topic of research and development as a country, especially as the ambassador for Sri Lanka in science, technology, and research. This is a key question, especially as we talk about many inventors who find it difficult, especially when they reach out to commercialize their inventions, their innovations. They face a lot of challenges, and most of the time they are discouraged towards the process. As we talk about this, you may have something in terms of comparing Sri Lanka and what lessons we can learn from countries such as the United States in terms of giving emphasis to research and development.
Yes, Indivari. But let me first add to what Deepal said. This is 100% true. Our education system is basically content-based. We have to move away from this content-based. So long as we are in this content base, we are not going to have a good opportunity to develop innovators and entrepreneurs and inventors, okay? Look at this right now. Today we have curfew, our roads are empty. But when I go to Sri Lanka, about 2 p.m. in the afternoon, the roads are full of buses and cars where all the kids are going for tuition classes, okay? Nothing has hurt our country as much as what tuition has done. So what the government has to do, and when I get the opportunity someday to come back to Sri Lanka and discuss this with the government, I'm going to encourage online education. In my own experience, I've been teaching face-to-face for nearly 6 years, and then the university said you had to teach online. In that one semester first semester I taught my students online, I found that my students knew the subject much better than the students I taught face-to-face, because the learning was their responsibility. They did the research, they did all the reading material I gave them, they answered all the questions. They were engaged, they were not just sitting in a classroom and listening to what I was preaching, but they did the work, they became better students, okay? So let's take anatomy, for example, okay? Anatomy, whether it is in Colombo or in the South or Jaffna, is the same. So we can have one anatomy professor sitting in Colombo and teach the entire country, medical students in the entire country, anatomy, and add some technology to it, virtual reality. So he can teach anatomy on the computer and use virtual reality, so this is what the heart looks like. Now, in addition to that, there are so many things that we have done in America to improve the medical education. Of course, we can borrow those ideas. Not only anatomy, but there is calculus, history, economics, you name it, every subject can be taught online. That doesn't eliminate a face-to-face classroom. So the student still can go to the classroom, meet the local teacher, discuss the difficulties, or the teacher can pick up one or two interesting topics and discuss those, keep the stimulation going. But you can deliver this and get all the cars and buses and everything out of the roads, and we are even environmentally better off, you see. So online teaching has to come, and more so now, because what happened in America was now during the spring semester, schools, universities got closed, students went to class online. And now we are going into summer. Of course, summer is basically no school. Now come fall, many American universities are not opening the doors for during the fall. So most of the classes will be online. If it can be done here, it can be done anywhere else in the world. So I think this taking a look at that education is a critical component of bringing innovation to Sri Lanka, okay? And get rid of this, I have given multiple talks in universities in Sri Lanka. At the end of my talks, not one person asked a question, not one person. So it's frustrating. You spend 1 hour telling something you thought was interesting and nobody wants to ask a question. So, I mean, there are so many funny things that happen over the years when I have given a talk. But encourage students to ask questions. Grade them based on the questions. When I teach a course, I have a smaller number of students, of course. I ask the student, you have to ask questions from me. So whenever a student asks a question, I pretend to write on a piece of paper. I'm not writing them. I pretend to write. And my students think I wrote the name of the student who asked questions, because I told them, I'm going to give you a better grade if you ask more questions. So you have to entice the student to ask questions. Then it becomes a stimulating conversation, okay? And the other thing is, university educators especially cannot simply remain as educators. If you are, this is good with professors of medicine, because professors of medicine, they go and teach medicine, then they go to the hospital and practice medicine, which is not the case with professors in science, professors in engineering. They just go teach, they don't practice engineering. So we just have to entice these professors in other fields other than medicine also to go and practice their field outside of just teaching. So these are things that we need to encourage. So your question you asked me was, how can you, the bottom line is, you have to come up with the idea that has a market value. If the idea doesn't have a market value, the investor is not interested in investing because he cannot recoup his money. Whether it is an institutional investor, whether it is a private investor or a private equity company or whoever, he's not going to be interested. So you have to understand, is there a market value for this product? That also comes with some degree of broad-based education. When you go to school, you do 3 subjects in advanced level. When you go to the university, you do, if you're an engineering student, you do just few engineering courses. And interestingly, in Sri Lanka nowadays, they don't even do science courses in the engineering degree, which is really a bad thing that happened. I remember that those engineers who are of my age, when they went to engineering school, the first 2 years they learned science like calculus, physics, chemistry, and so on. So their fundamental is very strong. Now they got rid of it and they just simply do engineering. They come out. So they don't have a broad knowledge. As compared to here, when you go to do engineering, you still have to do political science, social science, economics, languages, and all sorts of other subjects that enrich your learning experience. So when you finish your degree as an engineer, degree as a doctor, you come out, when someone comes and talks to you about marketing, he understands something about it. He's not clueless about what the marketing person is talking about, because he had learned something about it. So, you encourage these people to give a broad understanding of the field of engineering or medicine or science, additionally, you do these other subjects, you see. Here,
I think, sorry, go ahead, Dr. Vijay.
Here, I'm advisor in multiple incubators in Houston and the Texas TMCX and so many others. And I meet a lot of young doctors, young engineers, young computer scientists. And when I say young, they are in the age between, say, like 20 to 35, this age group. These doctors, they understand so much about a lot of things, a lot of economics, a lot of marketing. There are doctors who can write a program, do software development. They can write a Python program. There are doctors who formulated marketing strategies and do web development, including my son, who has no idea about those things. Being a doctor, he has done all those things on his own. All this web development, all this programming, because they are broad-based education exposure. So that is what we need in order to overcome that hurdle that you face when you're a young entrepreneur. You have to convince, you have to understand the language of the investor. You should be able to put yourself in that investor's shoes to understand how to present it to the investor. Mm-hmm. So then you have a balance. You want this. Here's how I'm going to provide your income source. This is your return on investment comes because this is how I'm going to do this. So these are sort of things that they have to learn, and that definitely comes from some degree of formal education.
Certainly, I think education, throughout this discussion, we've all the panelists have spoken about education, the importance of talking about education policy priority in terms of research and development. Arjuna, I think you'll have something to add on this when we talk about standardization. We spoke heavily on e-learning and education. But again, when we talk about education, we talk about curricula, we talk about proper standards here. But for e-learning, how do we develop systems of e-learning here in terms of a proper standard? How do we look at it? Because this is a vast area where sometimes it might be impossible to look at standardization. But what do you suggest here?
Actually, it's a very interesting question and a topic in the sudden onset of e-learning need and the variety of means of fulfilling that will add to the students' performance or expectation fulfillment. So I believe some standardization, as Dr. Vijay mentioned, I mean, reliance on significantly competent resource personnel to be a focal point of educational delivery. Mm-hmm. I mean, standardization of content, standard of methodologies, the time periods, that kind of, it's very important to carry out. So actually, again, educators might be able to look at the existing standards to develop their own procedures, their own methodologies. So I believe right now that kind of procedures are absent. It's basically a random set of practices, emulating of one another. I believe there would be people whose expectations will go unanswered and unsatisfied in the brain. So, for example, a certain parent might think their kids' expectations have been fulfilled, but whereas in actual terms, he or she, the student or kid, may be suffering. So this is a gap probably we need to address, and I think standardization could be a viable way to definitely look at this kind of a gap theory.
Right. I think we are in the final round of this discussion. We have spoken at length, but I wish I could speak to the panelists longer. But before we go to the final round, I'll just read out a few questions that we have been posted. I'm just selecting two out of that. We have one of our participants asking us, saying he would like to know how prevalent the preparation of business continuity plan in Sri Lankan organizations. If they don't, they have uh, any pre-development plans to continue with their critical activities. Any comments on this? This is to the panelists again. And then in Sri Lankan universities, the research topics are heavily theory based. There are no connection with the relevant industries when selecting research topics. I live in Australia here. The approach is to find solutions to industry problems by engineering graduates if they have this practice. When they graduate, they have a habit of developing new products, innovations in an innovative way. I think that's an observation from one of our panelists. But while we take these questions, this is open to the panelists. Dr. Bandula Vijay, you might want to take up these questions too. Ms. Deepa Suryarachi, I think during this final round of our webinar, I would like to ask you what policy priorities and also in terms of looking at a national action plan, what you propose, key points that you propose here going forward on the broader theme that we speak of this evening.
Well, if you go back on the topic that we discussed, definitely innovation will give a significant boost to our economy. So if you want to correct innovation, I think the easiest and the most important area to tackle, I would say education area. Because if we can develop questioning minds and the quality of those, then getting investors may not be that difficult, right? Because for inventors to happen, the economic support is crucial. But in order to do that, I think the priority should be given to reforms in education. When I say reforms, we don't have the luxury of time. I think if we take the university system, right now what happens is our advanced level examination is a selection exam. Right? It is designed to squeeze only 20,000 people to the university system. Right? And these universities don't, if you look at the capital utility of the universities, I think most courses can be taught 24/7. And if that kind of a broad basing of this happens, then what happens is our talent pool get higher. Then the real things will happen. I think that's the kind of immediate policy change that should happen. Whatever the courses that can be taught, and as Bandula said, so then there will be opportunities for students to broad base their subject matter, right? Like, in Singapore, they have now introduced humanities into the engineering faculty, right? Because that makes your mind work differently to innovate, right? And in Singapore, they are teaching Edward de Bono's thinking skills as a skill to develop. Right? I think, so if you don't tackle this, then we have very little pockets of innovation. But if you can broad base, then what happens is there will be a significant change in the whole system. So I think priority is in creating spaces in the education system for innovation.
Thank you very much for that. Arjuna, before we speak to Dr. Bandula Vijay, I would like to ask you the question of the transformation of Sri Lanka's economic model to fit this, the broader ambition of Sri Lanka's economic development led through innovations, massive development in this area. What policy priorities do you suggest here?
Right now, I believe the COVID threat is very, very important part to be considered. The COVID is going to set out the playground for everybody to play and reap their benefits. So actually, COVID has taught us a very unique lesson of appreciating risks and incorporating that into your business equation. The people, organizations which have appreciated that and incorporated risks into their decision-making process, I'm sure having an advantage over and above others. So this is basically should be a learning point that we need to consider when we formulate our policies. This kind of policies, if present, would have helped an organization to be guided by those, and the resources in the society and the government sector will be aligned to a situation like that. So COVID is one thing that we have faced, but there are other extremely low frequency, high impact incidents that could happen. So rather than waiting for a situation to culminate and respond in a mad rush, it's good to ensure that our policy framework incorporates this and compels organizations, institutions to factor them into a decision-making process is an important imperative. And I believe we are basically talking about various kinds of new products, new ways of doing that. I would like to consider those which will remain after the COVID incident. Because whatever that is there for the period, I would believe those are part and parcel of the response that is taking place. So I believe this standard we developed in line with Sri Lanka Standard Institute is a good example for a potential consideration. So the standard may not be only for this COVID. The learnings that the Sri Lanka Standard Institute had, the learnings the industry is getting out of that could be applied in future in various other situations as well.
Moving on to Dr. Bandula Vijay, I think we can wrap up the discussion with your comments here, Dr. Vijay. I would like to talk a little about as we create economic activity in place to face the post-COVID time. Along with your closing comments, what we need to focus on. I know we've spoken about education, but on this theme, innovations to science, technology, ICT, but what our immediate attention should be in terms of preparing for the post-COVID recovery while we are mitigating and facing the challenges presented at this current juncture.
Yes, in fact, I think the COVID has given us an opportunity to make a change and move forward on the right foot. As you know, I'm living in the United States, and you guys have done quite well. President Rajapaksa and the healthcare workers, the doctors, the healthcare people, the minister, and so on, the whole country has done a tremendous job in keeping this under control. So I want to congratulate the entire country and the administration for doing that. In fact, I always tell my friends, I would be safer in Sri Lanka. Our topic today was discussion about innovation. I think, like I said earlier, that the COVID has given us an opportunity to open the door and move forward into a new area, new vision for the country, okay? So innovation requires basically two things, capital and skills. Now, I'm going to leave the capital out because capital will come once we develop the skills. So I'm not going to talk too much about the capital. I think both this gentleman, Arjuna and Deepal, would be the best to comment on that. Skills. and we, three of us, extensively talked about the need for a sort of a problem-based education in order to develop skills. So I'm not going to talk even more about it. I think we talked enough about that. We have to develop trust among people. That also comes from the education. We have to start trusting people. We have to start trusting your coworker, your neighbor, your classmate. You have to start trusting and developing this trust. And I remember Deepal mentioned the project has been done somewhere that nobody else knew about the project, although the government has invested the money, so the government is a stakeholder in this project. And so these things shouldn't happen, right? Because in the first place, any research done with government funding has to be public. In other words, it has to be published, okay? So that you can't keep secrets. Any patent that you receive from where government has invested money is the owner is the public, okay? It is in this country at least, okay? So we have to have this sort of thing, but those are easy to resolve. But we need a cultural change that says, yes, we can do it. Because when I talk to my colleagues and my friends, my students, for the most part, they like something to be handed over to them. And I don't want to say handed over from the West, but pretty much they say, oh, is it being done in America? Is it done in America? No, we don't have to depend on the West. We don't have to depend on China and India. We have to do these things ourselves. To starting with, we have to be self-sufficient in many things. Agriculture is the one that I have talked much, even in my last interview with you. I discussed the importance of agriculture. We have to elevate the status of the farmer to that of a professional. His income has to be similar to that of a professional. Nobody in Sri Lanka going through advanced level and the university wants to be a farmer. That is not the case here. Several of these young people that I know, after they finished their education, they became farmers. It's okay to become a farmer. So we got to bring their status up. We have to provide guarantees for their crops. We have to minimize the involvement of the middleman in the business of the farmer. So agriculture is something that the government should address, to be self-sufficient. Imagine something drastically bad happens in India. We will run out of medicines within a month. We have to concentrate saying, we have a lot of metabolic diseases in the country, diabetes, hypertension, and so on. So we have to be manufacturing these medicines, these drugs in Sri Lanka. You know, drugs are some of the easiest things to manufacture. They are chemicals mixed up and then tableted, and even we have a pharmaceutical corporation who is making some, but we have to let it go out, let the private sector get in. The government knows exactly what type of drugs are brought into the country, how many dollars are spent buying these drugs. So you call the entrepreneur and say, hey, we are making this particular antibiotic. We are buying so many tablets or units of it for this amount of dollars. Give us a bid to set up a factory to manufacture this. So through the customs documentation, you can find what is imported to the country, where is the money flowing out, and so on. So you can ask the entrepreneurs to get engaged. So guaranteed market, right? So there is no risk. Government is the buyer. At the present time, the government is the buyer. So that hasn't changed. So government is the buyer, guaranteed market. So where's the risk? They can just set up a small room, buy a mixing, blending, all this chemical equipment, mix up the drugs and tablet it and give it. No, I'm not talking about medical devices. They are complicated. Right. But think about it. We don't even manufacture a syringe. We don't manufacture a needle, right? These are just cheap items, easy to manufacture. We are not talking about complicated, vascular stents and things like that. Something simple. Government is buying tens of thousands of these units every year. Somebody can manufacture it. Saline, the country has enough water. We are buying water from other countries as saline, right? So these are things that we have to bring it up, these issues. So the government has to create I came up with this acronym before this pandemic started. I call it Authority for Global Standing Development. I created it. I wrote a little proposal. I haven't sent it to the government yet, and the pandemic happened. So I said, no, I'll wait. Mm-hmm. So if the government creates an authority for global standings development, then we can select few things where we become the best in that area. Graphene is a good example. Apparently, from what I understand, our quality of graphene is one of the world's best. Okay, so if we can do it in graphene, we can do it in a lot of other things. Okay. Into that end, I also like to say there are a lot of Sri Lankan expatriates around the world, in America, in the UK, in Australia, in China. So many countries, we have a lot of expatriates. Good number of these expatriates, and you already know some of the names, they have come to the top of their careers. They are the best. They hold positions, very high positions in companies, governments, or they have their own businesses. The government can tap into this expatriate, this resource. And of course, they have to work with them, with the Sri Lankan counterparts, to build a system where they can help saying, I think this is how this is done. I can help you with this aspect, but I don't know that aspect. So we can work together. So somebody who wants to start, I just received yesterday a YouTube little video. Mm-hmm. When the pandemic happened, I developed a system to extract this expirate from COVID patients, and I installed that here. In one of my dentists needed it, so I installed it for him. And I received a YouTube video from a friend, a physician in Sri Lanka, saying, "Hey, Dr. Bandula, we have done something similar." So now here is an opportunity. I think the name of the company is Yantech in Martale, I believe. They have developed a system very similar to what we have done here. And so give these people a chance, bring them and interview them, get into the right people in the healthcare administration, and say, because one of the biggest problems with COVID patients is the expirate. When they breathe out the virus. You've got to get that virus out of from their face, out, extract it, either take it outside the building, or you have to disinfect it. This is very important. And one reason the nosocomial infections are happening is because of this. So a lot of doctors and nurses are getting infected who are in the ICUs because of this too much of virus in the air. So if you get this out, it helps the people who work with these patients. So likewise, there are very smart, bright people in Sri Lanka. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I think the people who have come here like me, we are the sort of the C grade students. The A grade students are in Sri Lanka. Okay. So they are there. So we have to give them a hand. We have to pick them up, pull the right people up, help them to establish their ideas, help their business, because they don't have the rest of the background. We earlier talked about the broad-based education. So we have to give them a hand. And with time, things will change. And I hope things will change. And of course, we will come out of this, I believe we will come out of this winning.
Certainly.
And that's pretty much I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for that positivity, that optimism, and the insights. I must also thank Mr. Deepal Suryarakshi, Management Consultant and former Commissioner of Sri Lanka Inventors Commission, for joining us on this discussion to talk about the path to economic revival and if innovations will lead to economic revival. This was an important topic, and the insights you brought in. Thank you very much for your time here.
You're welcome.
And we also had with us Mr. Arjuna Somaratna, who is a management consultant and technical committee member for Sri Lanka Standards 1672 of 2020 for COVID-19 safety management. Thank you very much, Arjuna, for joining us, for sharing your thoughts and your expertise in terms of standardization and how Sri Lanka can go forward building confidence with the rest of the world.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Pleasure to be here.
And last but not least, Dr. Bandula Vijay, thank you very much. As the science, technology, and innovation ambassador for Sri Lanka, based in the United States. It's early morning there, but thank you. It's a great way forward that you have proposed for Sri Lanka. I think these are areas that we would like to talk further on, but for today, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Indivari. Thank you for having me. And thanks for Arjuna and Deepal for participating.
Thank you.
Dr.
Great job being with you.
Very happy to be here.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure is ours. Pleasure is ours, Dr.
Certainly. So I leave it
Deepal
for
is in Seattle, Washington, is it?
No, this is Columbus skyline from my rooftop.
Colombo. I see that globe. I thought.
Okay, so it was a pleasure, and I think a great introduction. So we look forward to speaking once again on a similar topic. Thank you and good night.
Good night.
Good day to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.